Welcome to Commander Central, episode 91, and today we're going to take a look at cards the game has left behind. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
And it is just the two of us once again, and not just for a Thursday show. Chris is sick with, was it the flu or a cold?
All I know is he is down with the sickness, and I don't want it.
Wow, yeah. He didn't even get to play last night. He didn't come to the shop on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I'm buddies with one of his guys in his D&D campaign, and he said Monday night he looked pretty rough. So
For him to actually not come to the shop, even if he's like just there hanging out doing stuff, is something has gone horribly wrong.
Yep.
So how you doing?
I've had a rough 24 hours.
So you played last night, and then you went home not for any bad reason. You just you had stuff to do, so you took off about 9 or so.
I took off about 8:30. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I came home because I had to do prep for today because we knew we were recording early because I leave to go out of town for work tomorrow morning, so that would be Thursday. So we had to move our recording day today, Wednesday. So I came home, was doing my notes. I threw a couple pieces of clothing into the washing machine and left it, didn't think about it. And I came down to check on it because it'd been a while. And my basement laundry room had standing water in it.
And this time, it's not from snow melt, it's just from your washing machine blowing up.
My washing machine blowing up. Well, what made me come down is I smelled hot plastic coming up from the heat vent. And I'm like, well, that's weird. And I came down here to find water all over my laundry room. So I spent until about 12:30 cleaning all that up.
Well, here's at least you got it resolved, I guess. I mean, it could have been far worse.
Yeah, I mean, the repair guy comes next Friday, so the Friday of this show airing, essentially.
Okay. So you're just without a washing machine until then.
Right.
Well, here's my kind of weird story from today. So I worked from home, and at one point I went out to get the mail off the front porch, and there's a grocery bag on my front porch packed with snow with a frozen pizza in it. And it's like a gluten-free, dairy-free, presumably flavor-free as well, frozen pizza. And it's not like Lou. I mean, it's in the packaging. So at first I was like, all right, well, I left it there. I didn't know what to think. So I was going to walk my dog anyway, so I put the dog on the leash and walked her. And as I was walking, I'm checking other houses, just kind of looking at the front porch and wondering if is it some marketing deal? Somebody's putting these on everyone's porch. That seems like a really, poorly thought out way to do it in a bag full of snow. But of course, there's no pizza anywhere else. So I'm left at that point to conclude, well, maybe somebody was carrying their groceries home and it fell out of their bag and it was in front of my house. So some other good Samaritan saw it and decided to put it in a bag of snow on my porch. I don't, what else could it possibly be? And I'm like, I don't want it. So I went and threw it in the garbage because it's a frozen pizza on my front porch in a bag of snow.
Right.
So I went and threw it in the garbage. Fortunately, the garbage yesterday was garbage day, so there was nothing in my garbage can except for this bag I dropped in there with a frozen pizza in it because 20 minutes later, my wife texts me that a kid's coming home with them from school today whose parents have something going on and they need an emergency kind of babysitter, so he's coming home with her from school and he's allergic to gluten and dairy and his dad left a pizza on the porch so he could have something for dinner. So I'm like, oh,
no.
I got that. I'll take care of that. So I had to go around to the back, and it was fine because number one, it's in the packaging, in the bag, in my garbage can. So I just fished it out. But
oh my gosh.
So there's the mystery of the frozen pizza packed in ice on my front porch has been solved.
That's great.
Could have been far worse because actually I was had it been garbage day, it might have been packed with all kinds of gross stuff, and I would have just tossed it in there, or it could have been. Who knows? So anyway, I managed to not ruin that poor little kid's dinner. It's in the oven right now.
Well, that's good, and I'm sure you won't have a single slice of it.
I will not have
flavorless, like you said.
I will have none of that pizza. So you got a couple games in, as we mentioned. Anything fun happen in your games last night? I
got to Aetherflux Reservoir someone out of a game.
You did. Actually, it was a listener. You got to Aetherflux Reservoir a listener to death.
It wasn't Blood Bond. That's how I said that to him.
It was not. It was Ragnar Krav, I believe, right?
It was, yep.
So that was fun to see. Because at first I was like, I don't think he's going to kill me because I was 11 life.
And you had nothing on the board.
I had no board state, yeah. So you wound up killing somebody else.
Yep.
So yeah, that was fun to see. Anything else cool happen? Because that was the only game we played together, I think. I think then after that you split off and played with some other people.
Yep, I split off and played in a different pod. I ended up playing my Brago deck, which I haven't played in a few weeks. And so I shuffled it up because I was toying around with it last weekend, shuffled it up really, really well, and I drew my opening hand, and I giggled like a infant who just discovered his toes.
What was the opening hand? What did you have?
A Plains, a Rogue's Passage, Mana Vault, Thought Vessel, Azorius Signet, Peregrine Drake, and something else.
Oh, I'm assuming you won that game?
I did not.
Oh, really?
Mainly because I forgot how voting works, and so did the entire table.
On what card? On Council's Judgment?
No, one of my opponents was playing a Muldrotha deck, and they run Cohesive Portal in it.
Oh.
And so
man. So was it tied for the... What are the choices on there? Is it like destroy everything?
Destroy all non-land permanents,
right?
or draw a card. Yep. So we all chose the board wipe because we all had things in our hand to prevent the board wipe. And we all let voting resolve, and the first player went, okay, I have a response. And I'm like, wait a minute, we can't. And like one of the players was like, oh, wow, yeah, we all screwed that up. And like the Muldrotha guy was actually nice. He offered to like, we can take it back if you guys want to respond. I'm like, well, at this point, I would just choose let you draw a card because I thought it was more than one, and it's not.
It's just right. It's just a card.
Yeah, it's essentially a Phyrexian Arena without the life loss. You're just risking a board wipe.
Right.
Nope, but so we all were like, nope, you know what? We're not taking that back. We all made the mistake. Continue on, and that right there set me back because all my mana rocks were gone, and I didn't have a blue source except for like a Tundra. That was my only blue source, was a single land.
And that's a pretty heavy into blue deck.
It is. I eventually found a fetch land and got some land fetchers online, but the game drug on for about another hour and a half until the Yeva player just went off because we didn't take care of a Seedborn Muse.
Oh, yeah, that would do it. Yep.
And he did. Teamer Sabertooth would bounce something, and he had Beast Whisperer out there, so he would just cast something and keep drawing cards. And I think he was actually bouncing... What's the green creature that's like 3 triple green, draw when it ETBs, draw a card for every creature you control?
Oh, yeah. It's an older creature, isn't it?
Yeah. It's from like he was bouncing that with Teamer Sabertooth because he had like a Nykthos out, so he was able to do it like 2 or 3 times on someone's end step, so he was drawing an absurd amount of cards. And then he's like, oh, I found my Crater Hoof. I'm going to win. And we're like, yep, good game.
Nice. Well, I got to fire my Kresh deck up last night for the first time. I think I played 3 or 4 games with it. The first one was that game where you could have Aetherflux Reservoired me at 11, but you didn't. And it got off to a kind of a clunky start, and it was against a couple of decks. Yours tends to have a few Edict effects, and it was against a Shadowgang Brothers deck, too, which isn't a great matchup for that particular deck. At least at the start I got off to, it definitely wasn't. But it played fine, and the games after that, it played much better even. I've already got like a dozen changes queued up for it to kind of fix a few of the problems. But I was very happy with it because I didn't have to attack anybody. It's so based on the fling damage that made for something much different than the rest of my deck, so I did enjoy that aspect. The best game I had with it was the last one I played, and everyone had everyone kicked off pretty quickly, so we had some pretty clogged board states and trades going back and forth. And at one point, there was a bit of a counterspell war that happened, and everyone was kind of tapped out. And I had gotten a Vulturous Zombie out, which is a 3/3 flyer, but whenever a card gets put into a graveyard, you put a counter on it. So between like the counterspells going back and forth, and there was a Muldrotha player who was doing Muldrotha things, which puts cards in the yard. So the zombie was up to 18 counters on the Vulturous Zombie. And then I had gotten Kresh out too, and he had like 8 or 10 more counters on him. And it got to my turn, and I was able to cast Life's Legacy onto the Vulturous Zombie, which drew me kind of 18 counters, and it's a 3/3, so I get to draw 21 for 2 mana.
Oh, gross.
Feels pretty good. And then all those counters, of course, go over to Kresh. So it bumped Kresh up to like a 36/36 or something. And then in those 21 cards, I drew 3 kill spells. So like first person, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to cast Essence Harvest on you, and it deals, which is a black spell that deals the creature's power and damage to a person, and you gain that much life. So like domed the first person for 32 and gained 32, and everyone's like, oh man, and I'm like, well. Then I cast Flesh and Blood, which I also drew, which does the same thing. It doesn't gain you life, it just deals direct damage, and killed the second person, and then I got to fling him. So like I just drew 3 straight kill spells in that 21 cards and just killed all 3 people.
And that's exactly how you want to win in that deck, if I remember right.
Yeah. And there's a Founder's Ignition in there. I actually got to win 1 game with Ignition as well, if I have a giant creature out. But there's like, I think almost a dozen different either like spells that don't kill the creature, in the case of Essence Harvest, or fling/thud type ones where I sacrifice it. But if I don't have to sacrifice Crash in the process, then the creature I sacrifice just makes Crash that much bigger.
Right.
So the deck needs a little bit of tuning. I need a little more ramp, and I found a few holes in my logic. Like I was running Yahenni because I thought Yahenni would make sense since he's a sack outlet for 1, and then you also put counters on him. So I'm like, okay, well he'll get bigger from anything I'm doing. But I think I got him 2 different times out in the game, and both times the only other creature out was Kresh, who I'm not going to sacrifice to Yahenni. And if I can't sacrifice anything to him, he doesn't do much good. So, or it might be a she. Whichever, or actually it's a they. They are gender neutral.
Exactly.
So I pulled out Yahenni this morning. I have a few other changes I'm going to make, but I was very happy with that deck for my first go around with it.
Very nice.
Any MVP cards you saw do a lot of work last night?
Cohesive Portal worked well because 2 turns later, the Muldrotha guy just played it again.
Sure, yeah. So basically, it's either going to be a board wipe repeatedly, or you're just going to let them draw an extra card.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I like that in that deck.
Yeah.
That's actually a pretty good use of that. Oh, that's cool.
What about you, Dana?
Well, your Aetherflux Reservoir did pretty good work.
Yeah, it did.
You know, I'm always impressed by Archangel of Thune in any deck that has like particularly life gain that's on the commander, so it's really readily available. That card always gets out of hand really, really quickly. And I know it's pretty pricey. It's like $12 or $15. So I know it's not dirt cheap, but I feel like I should see it more. Like there's a lot of times in decks I see the deck doing things, and I always wonder if there was an Archangel of Thune out right now, it would be really, really bad. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like I don't see it as much as I should for how much it tends to impact the board, I think, in Commander.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because you had it out last night at one point, and I was like, oh, this is going to... I think you got killed pretty quickly, but like one more turn with that in your Regnant Crowd deck was going to be a problem. Well, if you want to tell us about your games, how would you find us, Max?
You can find us on the social media. We are CMDR Central pretty much everywhere. That's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, cmdrcentral.com, and especially on iTunes, where we would appreciate a 5-star review and maybe a nice written comment if you are so kind to do so.
Yeah, for sure. And we had some good feedback last week on the Bling show, and quite a few pictures sent our way of decks people had blinged out or altars they've done themselves. There was some actually really, really slick-looking stuff we saw.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, very, very cool. We are also found on Flipside Gaming.
Yeah, head over to flipsidegaming.com and use promo code CMDR in all caps, and you'll get 10% off all orders, $10 or more. And they do have Modern Horizons and War of the Spark available for pre-order.
Oh, nice.
So your 10% works on those boxes. That's where I got my Ultimate Masters box from. I was really impressed with how quickly I got it. I had it the Monday after it came out, so it was shipped over the weekend, and I had it Monday afternoon.
And we're getting pretty close to War of the Spark spoilers. This show's going to air on Monday, I think the 24th, I believe.
Correct.
And 25th. And
yes.
We should get spoilers the following weekend. I think they should be starting, I believe.
Yeah, someone confirmed that at PAX East, which is starting Thursday the 28th, there is a Magic. They're doing some sort of preview show there, and there will be some previews given away at PAX next weekend.
Nice. So looking forward to getting started seeing all of those, because it's been a long enough wait since the last batch of spoilers.
Right.
It's always too long. It's always too long.
Well, you know, Dana, you can't take an hour off of work every spoiler season to tune your decks.
Well, I mean, I can. I just shouldn't. That's probably not good for my career.
Speaking of PAX, and I'm going to do this right now, someone in our Slack, which is our chat, you can join by heading over to patreon.com/CMDRCentral and look at our rewards.
Jason Alt would be proud of that segue.
Someone in our chat said they are going to PAX, and they are going to try and get me the Nicol Bolas stained glass playmat, which is what you saw
nice.
in the reveal trailer.
Yeah, that thing looks great.
I don't remember who said that. And I just want to confirm they're still going to PAX, and if they're going to still try to get me the playmat, because someone else in our chat asked, hey, if you can get 2, I want one as well.
So if you were the person that Max talked to whose name he's then forgotten,
yes,
reach out to him in our Slack.
Please do.
Well, if you also want to join the Slack and have Max possibly forget what you told him, how would you do that?
Like I said a little bit ago, head over to patreon.com/CMDRCentral and look at our rewards. We'll be changing those up pretty soon. I think we gave a little spoiler on last Thursday's show about some new logos coming our way that maybe our patron supporters will get first previews of.
They will, as will the tattoo artists who are going to be putting those on our bodies.
Yes.
So there'll be some pictures of that coming for episode 100 for sure, as well as other things that we haven't either announced or decided upon yet.
Right. And yes, I'm getting it somewhere that is video appropriate.
Yes, as will I. All right, let's move on to the main topic here today and talk about cards the game has left behind. And we're not going to talk about cards that this isn't meaning cards that are overplayed or overrated or whatever. These are just cards that once upon a time were considered quite good in Commander, and something has happened, whether it's better cards printed or changes to the game, that have made it so they're just no longer things you see in Commander or should see in Commander even. Like, these are things that just have the game has left them behind, basically, as we said. So we want to talk about a few of these.
Yep.
And Max, why don't you kick me off with the first thing? We might have some overlap here because we made 2 separate lists of cards we want to talk about, so there might be some overlap. Why don't you start us off here?
No problem. I do want to say when we decided on this topic, my notes literally say episode 91, cards left behind, and then I wrote AKA in the margins.
Sure, right. Well, I was trying not to do too much of that, but yes, I found myself kind of being like, okay, well, Manolith was probably playable once upon a time, and it's not now.
Okay, so I'm going to start out with a pretty easy one here, and I'm going to talk about Naturalize.
Yeah.
So Naturalize is in about 7,200 decks on EDHREC. And so I'm just going to my cards, I pretty much said what I don't like about it and what I personally would play over them.
Sure.
So I'm not a big fan of the Destroy Clause. I know it's green and there's not a lot of exile, but destroying an enchantment or an artifact just plays into your Reanimator strategies, whether it's an enchantment with Replenish or KCI shenanigans with artifacts. So that's not really fun to do, setting your opponent up to maybe combo out.
Yes, agreed.
I prefer to run stuff like Deglamor or Unravel the Aether that shuffle the artifact or enchantment into your opponent's library, because the odds of them drawing that again in the next 2 or 3 turns is pretty low in a singleton format. If you do like the Destroy Clause, I think the best one would probably be Krosan Grip, because it has split second.
Yes, I would agree with that.
They can't respond. So there is a green card that does exile an artifact or enchantment. It's a sorcery called Fade into Antiquity from the Theros block, and it was reprinted in the second Conspiracy set, but I don't know, 3 mana at sorcery speed when you have Deglamor and Unravel at 2 mana at instant speed to shuffle. I guess it just kind of depends on your meta and playstyle.
Right. Well, so you have a case here where Naturalize is basically, it's disenchanted green, and it was printed, I think, in 8th edition was the first version of it. And at that point in time, when you're playing Commander, well, that's a 2-mana removal spell for artifacts or enchantments in green. That's pretty efficient. Well, why would I not run that? That makes sense at that point in time. But the game's then moved to past that, particularly in this case where it's printed other cards that are either more efficient or better. You're talking about Deglamor that came out in the Lorwyn block, which was after that. You have Unravel the Aether, which came out in Khan's block, which is, well after that. Even things like Nature's Claim for 1 mana, your opponent gains 4 life, I believe, but it's only 1 mana to disenchant something, or to naturalize something. But that was in Mirrodin block. So again, that's well after that point in time. Krosan Grip was in Time Spiral block. Fade into Antiquity, which you mentioned, is Theros, I believe. So you had this card that once upon a time was a pretty efficient, pretty solid removal spell, but there's just better options that have since been printed. So if you're still running Naturalize, you're running a card that's just had better things that have came along, and you probably shouldn't be running it anymore.
Exactly.
It's just been outclassed.
Yep.
The first one I've got on my list here is technically a bit of a cheat because it's like 3 or 4 cards kind of lumped together because the same thing happened to them. Most of mine after this point are ones that have been supplanted by maybe better versions or something. But in this case, I am going to talk about cards that got left behind when the game itself changed. And I'm referring to the Tuck rule back in 2015. And for listeners who don't remember, prior to that change, if you used a spell or ability that lets someone shuffle a creature into a library, particularly a commander, it just got shuffled in. That was just what happened. You didn't have the option to turn into the command zone. And as of basically it was 4 years ago this month, in March of 2015, that rule changed. So now you had the option upon a commander getting hit with a shuffle spell to return it to the command zone instead as an option. That killed probably, particularly 4 cards are the ones that jump out at me, which would be 2 counter spells, Spell Crumple and Hinder, both of which are 2 blue and a colorless, and they gave you the option to put the countered spell on the bottom of its owner's library. That's still, they're not bad spells, but at that point in time, if you countered a commander with either of those 2, there's a good chance it's just gone for the rest of the game. Like if you hit somebody's commander, you're just like, oh, it's going to the bottom of your library, and you're never going to see it again. Good luck. Now they're basically cancels. I mean, not entirely, because if you hit a non-commander, you can still put it on the bottom of the library, and that's against a graveyard deck that might be useful. But I have stopped running them, and I can't think of the last time I've seen either of them myself either.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to pause you there. I think I agree. I know there's a couple people in our shop that run them, but it's only to deal with the threats they know that are in the meta that aren't the commander, essentially.
Sure. And are those players that tend to play the 1v1 version as well, where if you get rid of something like that, it's probably gone for good because the games don't last that long?
Yeah, it's definitely the most of the 1v1 players, but I do see it pop up in their multiplayer decks.
Sure. The other 2 I would say got hit by this as well would be Condemn, which is a white 1-mana put a creature in the bottom of its owner's library. The problem with Condemn isn't so much the Tuck rule. Partially it is, but that only works on attacking creatures, which is a big downside. It doesn't do any good if someone drops at Elesh Norn or something that you need to deal with when you're trying to attack. Elesh Norn's still there, and if she's not attacking, you can't deal with it. Or it doesn't deal with some small utility creature that's causing you problems, like a, say, Deathrite Shaman or something. I mean, there's a lot of things that don't attack that still cause you problems. And if you can't get rid of them with a Condemn, like it was worth that downside when you could bury a commander for good. And I feel like it's definitely not now. Like the downsides of only being able to hit attacking creatures when you no longer have the option to make a commander go away for good, Condemn just isn't worth it anymore. And the other one is Spin into Myth in blue, which was a 5-mana spell that let you put a creature on top of its owner's library and then force them to shuffle. So basically it shuffles it in. That does the same thing. Like that used to get played quite a bit because that could just blank a creature, commander particular, for good. And, nowadays it's just not something you see play anymore.
Yeah. I never really understood Condemn even when Tuck was around. I guess, yeah, it's nice to tuck the commander away, but it's just a Swords to Plowshares with that has to be attacking trigger clause on it. So I guess, personally speaking, I'd rather still just run Swords to Plowshares and knowing that they have to recast that commander for 2 more.
I don't think it was ever ran as at least I didn't run it as a replacement for those 2. It was like a third option.
Right.
But nowadays I just forego it. I feel like it's losing the ability to get rid of a commander has made it not worth it for me.
Yep.
And I can't think of the last time I've seen it cast. Like I used to see it quite frequently, and I haven't seen it probably in years.
Yeah.
So what else do you have, Max?
Well, I sort of cheated too because my next set of 10 cards is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the key runes from the Return to Ravnica block.
Interesting. Okay.
So these do not show up in the top artifacts section on EDH Rec.
Yes, they do not.
The clue stones do, which surprised me, but it does say draw a card on it, so It made sense. So these are all 3-drop mana rocks that tap for a guild's color, whether it's red or white, blue or green. And then they had an activated ability turn into some sort of creature, like the Boros one turns into a 1/1 with double strike. The Orzhov one turns into a Thrall with lifelink. They're all pretty cool. I think, Dana, you used to run the Golgari one in Glissa just because it has Death Touch.
I did, yep.
But, I mean, at that 3 spot, when in your mana rocks, I mean, a lot of players love the 2-drop mana rocks to begin with.
Yes.
So when you hit that 3 spot, you really need to look for utility. So I instantly started subbing these out for Commander Sphere because they're going to tap for any color, not just the 2 of the guild it's representing. Plus, you can sacrifice it after you've tapped it to draw a card.
Commander Sphere is really good.
Yep.
For that reason.
Yeah. Another one that I actually prefer over the Key Runes is Coalition Relic. It comes in, it taps for any color of mana, and then if you want to take a turn off and put that charge counter on it, you can remove that counter to make 2 mana of any color.
Yes. I like that one as well. And it's also, once upon a time, Coalition Relic was relatively pricey. It was, $15-ish, I think.
Right.
And it's down to 4 or 5, I want to say now, which is still not nothing, but like it's a lot easier for some people than 15.
Right. Now, for all the people like me that like the 2-color decks, I have actually been swapping my Key Runes out for the Lockets because that 3-drop, it still makes the 2 colors I need, but late game, I can spend 4 mana to draw 2 cards.
The option to draw 2, particularly like on that turn 12 or something, is pretty useful. And man, the amount of times I actually did anything useful with the Key Rune was pretty limited.
Right. I mean, I still see them pop up in our local meta, but I never see them get activated to be the creature, which I find odd. So I think they're just being left behind now.
Yeah, I never really thought about those either, but like I'm not running the Key Rune Glissa anymore. I once upon a time had the one in my Sphinx deck. I don't remember what it turned into. I think a bird, 2/2 flying bird or something. I had it in that deck at one point in time just as a rock, and I've since replaced it with some kind of a 2-drop rock. I think I see the Boros one on occasion because it's a soldier with double strike, I want to say. But man, yeah, once upon a time when they first came out, I did see them pretty regularly, and I think they've definitely been a victim of both things like Commander Sphere and people just getting smarter with their mana bases and really leaning much more heavily into the 2-drop rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, good catch. Good call.
What's your next one, Dana?
My next one is Mind's Eye.
Interesting.
And I think Mind's Eye isn't a bad card, although it was never a particularly great card. It's a 5 mana, and you can spend a mana to draw a card when someone else draws a card. So once upon a time, it was a pretty good draw spell in Boros or Mono White or Mono Red, but it was released like back in 2003. That's 16 years ago now at this point. And in the interim, Red has got a whole ton of draw options that they didn't have back in the day. Whether it's Experimental Frenzy or Outpost Siege or a bunch of like budget versions of Wheel of Fortune like Reforge the Soul or what is a new one? Kolgan's, or not Kolgan's.
Yeah, Koldatha's Fury or something like that.
Yep.
From Battle Bond.
From Battle Bond. Almost all the cheap red looting spells have came out in the time since Mind's Eye was out, whether it's Magmatic Insight or Faithless Looting, Tormenting Voice. Things like Light Up the Stage have been printed in the intervening time. There's things like Staff of Nin was printed afterwards, or the Immortal Sun, which just came out 2 years ago. If you're going to spend that much mana, Immortal Sun draws you a card without having to invest mana into it, and it does other stuff. Mm-hmm. There was a card we talked about today you were asking about for your Jamoka deck, which is Endless Atlas. You can spend 2 mana and draw a card if you have 3 lands with the same name. And in Mono White or Mono Red, that's really easy to hit and is not going to require you to spend, first of all, 5 to cast it, and then you don't have to wait till somebody else's turn either. You can just spend 2 and draw a card.
Yep.
And I think even like things like Arch of Erazka, it's not super efficient, but it's also a land. It doesn't take up a slot. So in same thing, you can also do it on your turn if you want to spend 5 mana to draw a card. Arch of Erazka is not a terrible card. So I just think Mind's Eye is the kind of thing that it's still not bad, and if I was particularly playing Mono White, I might still run it. But I think Boros, there's just enough better options in Red, and there once wasn't. And I think same thing. I think Mono Red has just too many options to run Mind's Eye anymore.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all of that. I mean, you used to run this card quite a bit back in the day.
Yeah, I did. Like 7 years ago when we first started playing, I had it in a couple of different decks.
Yeah, but I've never personally been a fan, and I think I've said this on this show in a past episode where I never really liked having to budget my mana to pay one just to draw a card on someone else's turn.
And pretty often, granted, there's times you get it on turn 10 and you have mana free to draw a card off everybody else, but that feels terrible to draw on turn 5 and be like, well, I'm going to burn my whole turn here, and I don't have any mana left to draw a card until it comes back around to me again, and now I want to leave 2 or 3 mana free to still draw off everybody else. So it takes a full turn to pay off. You're almost time walking yourself twice. To first of all to cast it, second of all to have mana free to use the activations. It's just been outclassed.
Yep.
So let's move on.
Okay, my next couple are going to be a little bit of a hot take, and I know I'm going to get some feedback on all of them.
All right.
So we're going to start with Beastmaster Ascension.
Okay.
Beastmaster Ascension is an enchantment for 2 and a green. It's in 6,400 decks on EDHREC, and it pretty much says whenever a creature you control attacks, put a quest counter on it, and then when there are 7 or more quest counters on it, all your creatures get +5/+5. That sounds really good in theory, and it was when I first started playing EDH.
Yeah.
But you need to be attacking with stuff. So if you drop this on turn 3 with an empty board, you're not doing anything with it.
Yes.
So, worst case scenario, if you're attacking with a mana dork every turn, or 1 mana dork, 2 mana dorks, 3 mana dorks, as the turns progress, you're looking at maybe 3 turns to get all 7 counters. Something else I don't like about this is it gives just +5/+5. There's no trample, there's no sort of evasion.
There's not.
Along with it. So if you swing into an opponent's board with 4 or 5 creatures and they have 4 or 5 blockers, well, you just get that damage soaked up.
Here's where that card's been outclassed in particular. Once upon a time, I had it in my Gliss of the Trader deck. When I first put the deck together, I had it in there, and very frequently when I would cast it, I would just cast on like turn 6 or something, and I would attack and get 2 counters on it, and the next turn I would get 2 more, and then the third turn I would get enough to give my creatures +5/+5. That was a thing that happened 6 or 7 years ago when you were playing Commander. You could drop a card like that and have it sit there for 3 turns. That doesn't happen anymore. If you play that card, and it's still playable. I don't think it's unplayable. I played on my Edric deck, but that's a deck that routinely has 6 or 7 creatures out, and I'm just going to drop that and immediately attack, and they'll just all get the counters immediately. They'll all get the +5/+5 immediately, and I'll kill somebody.
Right, and because most of the creatures in that deck are either unblockable or have flying.
So the trample ceases to matter then, too.
Right.
Or you'll see it still, and I think it's still viable in a token deck where you're going to go wide with 20 creatures, and you don't care if they have trample because no one can block all of them. They'll block like 2 or 3, and it doesn't matter at that point.
Yep.
But, like I said, I would never try it outside of those environments, whereas once upon a time, you could. You could just put it in a regular creature-based deck and slowly put counters on it until it was enough to give your creatures a bonus. And that's just not something you can do anymore.
Yeah. Some of the cards that I think have outclassed this, Nylea, God of the Hunt, being the first one. She gives your entire team trample, excluding herself, but she has the activated ability to pump a target creature.
And for the most part, you can afford to drop Nylea before you need her because she's tough to remove.
Right. The next one being Ronus's Monument out of the Amonkhet block. Whenever you cast a creature, give target creature +2/+2 in trample. So maybe it's not that +5/+5, but if you're playing an elf ball deck and you drop 4 elves and you make whatever that big creature you've already have in play, now that's a +8/+8 in trample.
And the trample makes a big difference for sure.
Yes.
There, yeah.
And then the final one, if you still want something that's a little more delayed, Song of Freyalise, the saga out of Dominaria. Its final chapter gives your entire team +1/+1, vigilance, trample, and indestructible until end of turn.
And you're also, like, again, talking about slow rolling that thing up. In the case of Song of Freyalise, you're actually getting something for those modes along the way.
Yes.
Versus just playing Beastmaster Ascension and waiting for a couple turns and hoping you have enough counters on it.
Exactly.
That's a good call. I hadn't really thought about that one for a while. My next one is one that I think just kind of got the last nail in the coffin here recently, and that's Dreadbore. And Dreadbore is a 2-mana, 1 black, 1 red for a sorcery to destroy target creature or planeswalker. So, first of all, being sorcery speed isn't great, but when it first got printed in Return to Ravnica, first of all, there wasn't a lot of ways to destroy planeswalkers, but that's 2 mana to take out a creature or planeswalker isn't terrible. And there's no color restrictions on it. It was runnable at that point in time. Because particularly in black, there wasn't a lot of stuff that didn't have some kind of restrictions on it. And obviously in red, Lightning Bolt is pretty limited with what you can kill. Really the main competition at that point in time was Terminate, and I would say maybe Go for the Throat. So yeah, Dreadbore was runnable. Well, in the intervening time, Theros gave us Hero's Downfall, which is instant speed for 1 more mana. But instant speed's a big deal. It's probably worth 1 more mana. And then we just got Bedevil in Guilds of Ravnica, which hits a creature or planeswalker or artifact.
For 1 more mana.
Also at instant speed.
Right.
So in the same color combinations, or, here's Unfold, it's just black, but you have access to it. I think we've gotten 2 spells in addition to the ones we already had, which was Terminate and Go for the Throat. At that point in time, if you're looking at, choosing between those 5, I think Dreadbore becomes unless you're running all 5 of them, Dreadbore becomes the one you don't run.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I still see Dreadbore pop up in like Kess decks, but that makes sense. You can get 2 of them.
Sure, yeah.
But I think in your standard Rakdos deck, I think Dreadbore gets the chopping block.
And there's a couple more in there too, like things like Murderous Cut that got printed that's a pretty playable card, and Sever the Bloodline that has flashback at sorcery speed. I mean, I just think there's enough other options that when I'm looking at a deck with black and red, once upon a time I considered Dreadbore, and at this point in time, I just don't.
Yeah.
It has been replaced. So what do you got for us?
Okay, hot take number 2.
I'm ready.
Coat of Arms.
You know what? I didn't think about this at all, but I have not ran one in a deck for quite some time.
Yep, so for those who don't know, Coat of Arms is a 5 mana costed artifact that reads, each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares at least 1 creature type with it. So if it's a Goblin Warrior and you have a Goblin Shaman, they're getting +2/+2. Now, the tricky part about this is it affects all players. It's not just your control. So
right,
if your opponents, every now and then, humans being the best tribe in the game, people tend to drop 2 or 3 humans in a game. You're helping them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the kind of card where I think if you're going to play it, you better win with it the turn you play it.
It's like you're reading my notes.
Yeah. Well, and that's similar to Beastmaster Ascension, too. Like, once upon a time, you could afford to drop that and slow roll it till it made a difference. You can't anymore unless you're playing that really, really, really specific deck. You just need to use it for a kill spell. And at that point in time, you're in colors where you probably have access to, like you said, Crater Hoof or Overrun or Overwhelm Stampede or Nylea or something anyway.
Yep. So the stuff that I think that has, outclassed Coat of Arms now would be Vanquisher's Banner. That's the newest one from the Ixalan block. It's an anthem. I think it has a draw ability on it too.
Doesn't risk helping your opponents at all.
Right. And then you have some older cards, such as like Adaptive Automaton. It's a creature, but it is essentially Coat of Arms. Other creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1.
Yeah.
And then there's also Door to Destinies, which when you cast a creature of a said type, because you name the type, it gets a Destiny counter on it, and then all creatures of that type get +1/+1 for each Destiny counter.
And if you're playing red, also from Lorwyn block, you have things like Shared Animosity. Mm-hmm. You have things like Dictate of Heliod in white, where it gives your creatures +2/+2. In addition to all the green options. Yeah, I think there's way less riskier cards available out there that you're not going to get burned on. And Coat of Arms, I agree, has been left behind.
Awesome.
That's a good call. My next one on the list here is going to be, again, a bit of a cheat because they're very similar cards, and that's Mortify and Vindicate. Vindicate I'm not entirely sure about, but Mortify's got left behind, particularly by 2 cards, Utter End and Anguish Unmaking, that have gotten printed in the last couple of years. Although at this point in time, I say couple of years, but Utter End, which was in Khan's block, which is 5 years ago at this point.
Wow.
But I remember when I first started playing, Vindicate was like a $20 card, and I was really bothered that particularly on a budget, I'm like, man, that would be so perfect for this deck. I'm like, well, I'll run Mortify, but someday I want that Vindicate. It's perfect for this deck. And then, flash forward to today, if I have an Orzhov deck, I'm definitely not looking at Mortify. And Vindicate, man, I'm probably not anymore. I know it hits more targets, but it's sorcery speed. And at some point, you only need so many of those effects. And Utter End and Anguish Unmaking both being instant, and they kind of get you there. They're exiles. And then you also have things like Crush Contraband available. You have things like Return to Dust available. The couple black spells we mentioned, whether it's Go for the Throat or Hero's Downfall or Murderous Cut. Yeah, I think there's just enough stuff at this point in time that Mortify definitely doesn't make the cut, but I've checked the last couple of Orzhov decks I've built, I have not ran Vindicate either.
Interesting.
So I think it just doesn't make it, and I think Mortify definitely doesn't, unless you're on a real tight budget, but like if it's not like Autorend or Anglish Making are super expensive, they're a couple bucks a piece, but the average player for the most part should have access to them. And the next one I have is similar to Mortify, which is its counterpart from the Ravnica block, Putrefy. And I ran Putrefy longer than Mortify. It was in a deck up until about a year ago. And it's always had kind of some stiff competition because, after it was printed, we got Beast Within, and we got, like we mentioned, Hero's Downfall, and Go for the Throat came out afterwards. So there's been some competition. Abrupt Decay and Return to Ravnica. But the last year, we've gotten Windgrace's Judgment and Assassin's Trophy that are available in that color combination. That knocked out of my deck. I replaced Putrefy with Windgrace's Judgment, and I wound up actually replacing that with Assassin's Trophy. But if I wanted to add one more back in, it would be Windgrace's Judgment. Putrefy is just not on my radar anymore. And that's too bad. It's a cool card. Destroy target creature or, well, it's artifact, I believe, not enchantment, right?
Yes.
And that's useful. Like, that's a pretty good modular spell for 3 mana at instant speed. But Assassin's Trophy is better, and Windgrace's Judgment is just better, and there's just enough stuff that I don't need that many targeted removal spells. Putrefy doesn't make the cut anymore.
Yeah. I think the downfall of that card really started when Golgari Charm got printed.
Yeah, that's true. That was one as well.
It can do what it's doing for 1 less mana, or it could do something different.
Yeah, I agree.
So my next one is the card Banefire. Banefire is a sorcery speed spell for X and a red, and it just says Banefire deals X damage to any target, but if X is 5 or more, Banefire can't be countered and the damage can't be prevented.
And what's that was that in originally?
Conflux, I believe.
Okay.
But it's kind of a standard all-star right now.
Yeah,
in the burn decks.
Right now it's actually seeing some play, because it got reprinted in the core set, right?
That is correct. But in EDH, there are just so many, if you want to attempt burn and direct damage, I think there are just many better ones. Probably the least of the most impactful would be Comet Storm. It's not one of my favorites, but it does have the multi-kicker, so you can hit a bunch of people with it if you have the mana. Some of the other cards, though, that are just probably flat out better than Banefire is like Jaya's Emulated Fire, the new legendary sorcery from Dominaria.
Oh, yep.
Because you can hit up to 3 targets. There's Fall of the Titans from the Battle of Zendikar block with the Surge cost, which does this same thing without the non-countered ability, but you can hit 2 things for X. So I just think when it comes to burn, Banefire is starting to feel like it's fallen behind the times. And big caveat, this goes in any Mythics deck.
Sure. Right. At that point in time, you're just running almost every X spell you can find, and so I get it there.
Right.
Well, my next one is kind of, rather than necessarily specific cards that have bumped it, it's kind of a meta shift, at least for me, but I think this probably applies to a lot of places, and that's Darksteel Plate, which is an equipment for 3 mana that you can equip for 2 and give a creature indestructible if it's wearing the plate. I remember being shocked at how efficiently costed Darksteel Plate was to give a creature indestructible, and it did work, I think, for quite a few years, but the meta's really shifted, and when I say meta, I don't just mean like the shop we play at. I think EDH as a whole has really shifted into not destroy effects like you mentioned with Naturalize earlier.
Yep.
In addition to people just like trying to focus on those spells when they're available, we've had a bunch of ones printed in the last 5, 6, 7 years that people run regularly, whether it's Utter End or Anguish Unmaking that I mentioned earlier for the Putrefy segment, or Chaos Warp in red, which shuffles it, or we've gotten board wipes that actually exile or tuck, like Terminus. Blue has gotten Reality Shift, which lets you exile the creature as well. And those are all cards I feel like people tend to run in any deck that's able to run them, and those weren't cards that existed, 6, 7 years ago. So the game itself has shifted to the point where just giving a creature indestructible isn't necessarily as amazing as it once was.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think we can speak really highly of this because our meta locally here at D20 has recognized Exile as a better alternative than Destroy.
Yeah. I mean, like to the point where the couple of decks I had where I ran Darksteel Plate, it just frequently wasn't doing anything. I put on a creature and, occasionally there'd be a board wipe the next turn that it would survive. But for the most part, if someone wanted the creature gone, they would just get it gone. The plate didn't stop that. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots do a lot more work, generally speaking, I think, than Darksteel Plate does.
Gotcha.
So I've got one more after this, but how many more do you have here for us?
I have one more as well.
Perfect. So what's your next one?
My next and final one is Stroke of Genius. So this is an instant speed spell for X, 2 and a blue, and it just says target player draws X cards. So when you look at this compared to, and I'm not going to compare this to your standard like Artificer's Intuition where it's just draw X cards, discard a card. I'm going to compare this to more of the other X draw spells. Specifically, I'm going to compare it to Pull from Tomorrow, which was from the Amonkhet block, which is instant for an X blue, draw X cards, then discard a card. So if you want to draw 3 cards with Pull from Tomorrow, that's 5 mana. If you want to draw 3 cards with Stroke of Genius, that's 6 mana.
Right. Yeah. Now you have to discard one off Pull from Tomorrow, correct?
Correct, but I mean, if you're casting this with 2 or 3 cards already in your hand, most likely you probably can discard a land or something.
Yeah.
Some other, maybe the next non-X spell I would actually compare this to would be the new one from Ravnica Allegiance, which is Precognitive Perception. So for 3 blue, you just draw 3 cards. But it has that addendum clause of if you cast this during your main phase, instead scry 3, then draw 3. So I just think draw 3 is just the number I chose when I was doing my notes, because that's just a good set of cards, to get into your hand at any given time. There are just better ways to do that than Stroke of Genius, in my opinion.
The one thing about Stroke it's worth noting here is it is targetable. So like if you were in a deck that can make infinite mana, it doubles as a kill spell. But I think beyond that, and I would say this probably applies to a whole bunch of X draw spells, not just Stroke of Genius, whether it's Blue Sun Zenith or Brain Geyser or what have you. I think once upon a time, and I thought this way as well, but I think the game played this way, once upon a time, you would very frequently make it to that turn 14, and you'd be at 1 card in hand because you weren't running small draw spells, you were just running haymakers, and you're like, oh, I'm going to Stroke of Genius, or I'm going to Blue Sun Zenith, or whatever, for 12, and draw 12 cards, and man, how powerful does that feel? And I think the game, the way it was played back then, pre-Innistrad maybe, or whenever that was, the game played in a way that totally made sense to have those kind of spells be your draw spells because the games lasted that long and you could afford to do that. I feel like the game as a whole isn't one that's friendly to you assuming you're going to be able to dump 14 mana into a draw spell. I think, yes, occasionally that happens. You get to that point, and I think we've done it. I've gotten to the point in the game where I've been able to do a Sphinx's Rev for 9 or 10 or something. But there are so many times, even Sphinx's Rev, I'm partially still running it in my Asperia deck for flavor reasons. There's been way too many times I've drawn that and looked down and been like, oh, I've got 4 mana here, so I can draw 1. Or 6 mana. Okay, if I have 6 mana, I can draw 3. But I would still much rather draw, for 6 mana, there's static cards that just would draw you 4 or something. Or there's Recurring Insight that's probably going to draw you a dozen cards for that same 6 mana. Like those X blue draw spells tend to not really get efficient until you're talking 8, 10, 12 mana. And at that point in the game, nowadays, you probably need to be doing bigger things than drawing just a fistful of cards. And if you're hoping to be able to draw a fistful of cards for the most part, I don't know. I don't know if your games, if you're going to get that, you're going to get there, I don't know if that's going to happen like it once did.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And personally speaking, I think the big X spells, and I mean, I run Sphinx's Rev and Brago. They're a higher target when someone says, oh, I'm going to cast Stroke of Genius for 9. Or we'll just use 6 again, like, I'm going to cast Stroke of Genius for 6 versus a static card that says, oh, I get to draw 6 cards.
Right.
I am more adept to counterspell that Stroke of Genius versus the static card.
Well, and for that amount of mana that you're spending too, Torment of Hailfire is just going to kill somebody. Or a Sanguinate's going to probably kill somebody. Like, there are some spells that at that point in time just end the game, and I feel like Stroke of Genius even in the best case scenario for the most part, unless you easily generate infinite mana, I think it doesn't get there, and I think most of the X draw spells don't. So
Okay.
I have one more here, and this was once upon a time kind of a staple, particularly in decks that didn't have a lot of removal options. I'm talking about Spine of Isha. And I think it's still playable in some decks that have like weird recursion or blink abilities. I think, do you still run this in Brago, Max?
I do not.
You do not. So even in that case where you have the chance to use it every single turn, you're not running it anymore.
Well, the reason it's not in Brago anymore is because I really, about maybe a year ago, my goal was to drop that curve in that deck as low as I could to the ground.
Sure.
And at, 7 mana?
Seven mana, yeah.
There's
Sorcery speed.
Yeah, there's better things to spend 7 mana on in that deck at that time. And I was running Palinchron back then, and Palinchron got the cut eventually too because it's 7 mana.
Sure. But 7 or 8 years ago, if you're playing like red or black or Rakdos in particular, where you don't have ways often to deal with enchantments, or if you're in mono black and you have no way to deal with artifacts or enchantments, Spine was a legit, like, desperate way to do that. Okay, yes, it costs 7 mana, but I can solve that problem. It's going to lose me the game. Nowadays, we've had 2 cards that are probably better. We have an Unstable Obelisk that is a mana rock, so like Spine of Isha, you don't cast. It sits in your hand doing nothing until you're at 7 mana, and then you only cast it when there's that problem that you have to deal with immediately. Unstable Obelisk, you just cast it for 3 as a mana rock, and if you happen to need it, great. You can spend 7 to sacrifice it and destroy a target. But if you never need it, well, then it's just there being a mana rock. It's never a dead card.
Right.
And then in the Battle for Zendikar block, we got Scour from Existence, which is a 7 mana colorless spell. So same as Unstable Obelisk and same as Spine, it can go in any deck. Now you're probably not going to run it in most decks unless you're in Rakdos or Black or something and you want a way to deal with things you can't deal with. But it's the same mana cost, and it's an exile spell at instant speed from your hand. So you can use it as a reaction to something, and it deals with it permanently by exiling the thing. So that is a much better spell for the most part, too, assuming you don't have some kind of a blink recursion or some kind of a artifact shenanigan thing going on with Spine. You know, once upon a time, that was your go-to colorless option in decks that needed it, and we have at least 2 better options, and I don't think anyone is looking to run 3 7-mana ways to deal with an enchantment or artifact in Rakdos or in mono black.
Right. Ooh, I hope not.
Maybe somebody is, but man, that would feel pretty bad.
If you are, head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and look at our deck tech tiers.
We will help you out replacing your Spine of Isha. Yes, for sure.
Yes.
So I think those are the ones that popped into my mind that I most wanted to talk about, that I still occasionally see and feel like the game has left behind. But there's probably plenty more that we didn't think of, or that are kind of maybe things that pop up in somebody's meta. I think there's probably some Planeswalkers out there in particular that people are still running, even though there's better versions in those colors. And like that early beginning cycle of Planeswalkers, the first 5, Garruk still sees a lot of play, but like I think some of those have been left behind because the abilities are so unfocused.
Probably, yeah.
So
Liliana Vess still sees some play, but
it's a real specific thing with somebody in black who's looking to do swamp things for the most part.
yeah.
So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But so yeah, I'd love to hear back from anybody out there who wants to reach out to us on social media and let us know what cards you think that we didn't talk about that the game has kind of moved beyond. And we're specifically not talking about commanders because, yeah, there's commanders that get outclassed, but maybe there's some style points going on there where people just like, I really love running this one commander, or I love Lady the Mountain. Okay, well, I get that. Whereas I think like in your removal spell package, I don't know if there's anyone that's super attached to Mortify that's just refusing to switch to Anguish Unmaking for style points.
Right.
So if you want to share some spells that we may have missed that the game has left behind, you can find us on the Twitter birds or reach out to us at any of our various social media places that Max mentioned earlier, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. I think that is going to wrap it up for this week's Monday Chrysalis episode. And I think we're going to be back on Thursday again with another deck tech that may or may not have Chris, depending on how he's feeling. Until then, I am Dana.
And I'm Max.